Jai Hind, Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 24th of September 2020. Now, in this video, we'll be discussing the following topics: CAG, Rafale vendors yet to confirm tech transfer. So, in this news, I will tell you about the concept of offset policy that we follow in our defense procurements. What is the offset policy? Why is it important? What are the limits? I will tell you everything about that offset policy. Then 40% toilets in government schools non-existent, unused according to CAG. So I will be telling you about the CAG report. So basically, like the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, there is also Swachh Vidyalaya Abhiyan, under which toilets are constructed in schools. As a matter of fact, Right to Education Act stipulates that every school should have separate toilets for boys and girls. And the issue of toilets is very, very important in schools. It determines even the attendance rate and the retention of students in the school. So many PSUs built toilets in these schools, and they reported that they have built 1.4 lakh toilets, but CAG basically checked it and it gave its report. So in these two, I will also give you a brief about CAG. Who is the CAG? What is its constitutional position? And what functions does the CAG do? Then China vows to go carbon neutral by 2060. So if you remember 2 or 3 videos back, we discussed the concept of carbon neutrality and also environmentalism and how that is a scam, and how the developed countries and the environmentalists from the developed countries are pushing their agenda on us, especially they are demonizing coal. So this one, China is basically saying that we'll go carbon neutral by 2060. So I will tell you what is carbon neutrality. Another concept that is related to carbon neutrality is carbon sequestration. So I will also tell you about carbon sequestration. I will also tell you why China is saying that and what really carbon neutrality means. Let me tell you, carbon neutrality does not mean that you stop carbon emissions. It is a unique method of accounting, and different things are used, including emission trading. So I will also give you a brief about emission trading in this news. Then G4 seeks time-bound reform of Security Council. We have already discussed in detail the G4 in yesterday's video. So in this video, I will be telling you some additional facts or points about G4. For example, the reform agenda that they are pushing, what should be the structure of the newly reformed UNSC. Then I will also tell you about some reforms and some reports and some proposals that have been made for this reform proposal. Then again, Pusa decomposer. So in yesterday's video, we discussed the whole issue of stubble burning. So Pusa decomposer is a solution to stubble burning. Basically, what happens? Why do the farmers burn the stubble? I have discussed in detail in yesterday's video. I've also told you about the climatological, economical, and the policy reasons which lead to this problem, some unique reasons. So basically what happens? They burn the rice chaff or the rice straw to prepare land for the next cultivation season for wheat, basically, which is a rabi crop. So basically it takes 45 days and upwards for the rice chaff to decompose. Now that is a long time. So this Pusa decomposer, it basically uses strain of fungi, and it is a course of 4 tablets. You just mix it with soil and water, and it decomposes the rice chaff or the stubble within 25 days. So this is a very good thing. I will tell you in detail about this. Then non-utilization of cesses and levies. So again, a report by CAG that the cess and the levies that have been imposed, they have not been transferred from Consolidated Fund of India to their destinations. So first I will tell you what is Consolidated Fund of India, what is Contingency Fund of India, what is public accounts. Then I will also tell you what is cess and what is surcharge, right? So all the concepts I will be telling you about. Then mass stranding of whales. Unfortunate news. Off the coast of Tasmania, around 440 whales, long fin pilot whales, have died. So in this I will tell you why the mass strandings occurs, the probable reasons, because nobody knows for sure why they happen. That I will tell you, and I will also tell you something about the long fin pilot whales, and I will also give you a brief about the geography of Australia, because that is in news. So this is all that we'd be discussing in this video. Now let's get started. Rafale vendors yet to confirm tech transfer as per the report of CAG. Now, first of all, CAG is Comptroller and Auditor General of India. CAG is a constitutional position, and basically articles 148 to 151 of our constitution deal with the office of CAG. Now, CAG is a very, very important functionary in our parliamentary democracy system because he is the keeper of the government purse. Basically what he does, he ensures whatever money that government of India takes, it spends where it was meant to be spent. For example, government is taking money in the name of helping the poor, but basically that money is going into the pockets of the ministers or some other bodies. Then CAG is the one who would basically check these accounts and he would find the culprits. Now, CAG became very, very famous in the light of 2G scam, Colgate scam, and the Commonwealth Games scam. In fact, it is a very, very important point that the reports of CAG played a very, very important role in the downfall of the then UPA government. That is the reason why when after retirement, Mr. Vinod Rai, who was the CAG, after retirement, he was offered some non-profit employment by the government. So Congress made a huge hue and cry about it. So let's leave the politics aside. So as I told you, CAG is the watchdog of the government's purse. CAG ensures that whatever money has been taken, basically government of India cannot spend even a single penny on its own violation. It has to get each and every penny that it spends approved by the parliament. That is why we have the principle of budget, right? Now, there are some heads of the expenditure which are not clearly stated that deal with national security and all that. But apart from that, every other expenditure that the government takes is accounted for, and the CAG is the one who checks those expenditures. Both of the central government and the state government, various departments and ministries, all the expenditures are checked by CAG. Then the CAG makes a report. That report is sent to the President of India, right? Now, it is the duty of the President of India as per Article 151 to lay those reports on the floor of the both houses of parliament. Now, the problem is that Article 151 does not specify the time limit in which the president has to lay those reports. So what happened in the 2G thing was that the reports were with the president for a very, very long time, but he did not actually table those reports in the parliament. Then those reports got leaked somehow, and there was a huge hue and cry about it in the media. And then the president and the government was forced to table those reports, and rest we know is history. So CAG, very, very important. So because session of parliament was going on, so many CAG reports were tabled and they are being discussed. So this one is about Rafale, that vendors, basically what happens whenever a foreign vendor takes a project in India which is above rupees 300 crore, then he has to invest at least 30% of this amount into Indian companies. This is to basically promote indigenization of technology and to promote Make in India and to promote our local industries, local defense-based industries, because for any country which aspires to become a superpower or which aspires to be powerful needs to have a robust domestic defense industry, right? So we have to be pragmatic. We cannot wait for 50 years for our industry to develop. So we keep importing whatever we want, but we keep a part of that. For example, for investment above rupees 3,000 crore, 30% minimum has to be kickbacked or invested in Indian companies. That is a concept of offset. And this whole thing is called as offset policy. So what happened in the Rafale case, that the deal that government of India signed with the consortium of 4 French companies. So they said that instead of investing in India, we will transfer some technologies. Now initially government of India identified 6 technologies. They wanted transfer of those technologies, but these companies, especially Dassault, they said that 5 of them are our core technologies, so we cannot transfer them. And the 6th one has also not been transferred. And that is not the case with the Rafale deal only. Many other deals in which the vendors had promised to transfer technology, they have not done so. So CAG report is just highlighting that there is no scam or anything. It is just highlighting a factor and government needs to work on that, right? So let's see what the article is saying. French aerospace major Dassault Aviation and European missile maker MBDA have till date not confirmed the transfer of technology for the indigenous development of engine for the light combat aircraft LCA. We all know LCA Tejas. So its engine is called Kaveri. See, these are little points that you must know. So LCA Tejas and engine is what? Kaveri by the DRDO. Under the offset contract relating to rupees 60,000 crore deal for 36 Rafale jets, and even in yesterday's video we saw that news that a woman pilot officer would be joining the 17 Golden Squadron, that is the squadron of Rafales, and that is based in Ambala. So she would be flying that. Now in September 2015, Dassault Aviation and MBDA initially proposed to discharge 30% of their offset obligation in Rafale deal by offering high technology to DRDO. Now let us first see what is offset policy. It is a policy under which foreign vendor is required to invest at least 30% of the value of the contract in India. Now which projects are eligible? All defense capital imports above rupees 300 crore are mandated to invest at least 30% of the value of contract in India. I've told you the reason, that to develop our domestic defense industry, and it is very, very important for any country to have a robust domestic defense industry. Now, why the offset policy? To develop Indian defense industry and bring in high technologies. That offset policy was adopted in 2005. Now, the Rafale deal, as I told you, 50% offset clause, and it was signed in September 2016. And a consortium of 4 French partners, Dassault Aviation, MBDA, Safran and Thales. Dassault Aviation has set up a joint venture with Anil Ambani's Reliance Defense. Now, Mr. Anil Ambani is in danger, or he has gone bankrupt, so we don't know what is the future of this. But anyways, Dassault Reliance Aerospace Limited in Nagpur to manufacture components for the former's civil jets. So they will be making components for civil jets of Dassault. Now, like I told you that India was asking for 6 technologies, but they said that 5 are our core technologies. So let us see 6 new technologies. In April 2016, the DRDO identified 6 new technologies to be obtained from firms under the offset obligations. But the vendors did not agree on transfer of 5 technologies, as most of them were not within the vendors' core competence. The 6th proposal of DRDO was to obtain technical assistance for the indigenous development of an engine, Kaveri. So like I said, for LCA, they are developing an indigenous engine called Kaveri, which has also not been confirmed so far. What about other deals? From 2005 till March 2018, 46 offset contracts were signed. Now the figure is not important for you. And out of those, only 59% have met their commitment. So rest 41% are yet to meet their commitment. So this is the broad outlook. Again, let me tell you, this does not signify or indicate any scam or any wrongdoing by the government. It is just telling us that these are the things that have been lagging. 40% of toilets in government schools non-existent or unused as per the reports of CAG. Again, since the government's funds are involved, then CAG steps in, and basically different ministries or departments or the wings concerned, they must have filed reports that we have made this many toilets. So CAG actually goes and checks on field whether they exist or not, and based on its surveys or the reports that it made, it has presented a report saying that 40% of the toilets in government schools are non-existent or unused. Now let us see what it is saying. Public sector units claim to have constructed 1.4 lakh toilets in government schools as part of Right to Education project. See, now you must wonder what is the connection between toilets and right to education. Now there's a very deep connection, especially when it comes to girl students. See what happens. You go to school, you spend 8-9 hours there, right? So you would want to, or you would need to use the toilet. Now, if you're a boy, it is easier. It becomes easier in our country, whatever the practice is. But for girls, they need their privacy. But if the toilets are non-functional, or in many cases, toilets just do not exist in schools. So just imagine what sort of a problem would girls face, especially the teenage girls who might be going through puberty and they would be having periods. So they would want a space of their own. But since the schools don't have toilets, the girls don't feel like going to the school. It is a very, very big reason and it has been well documented. And just imagine yourself, for example, if you're going to an organization to work or for any other purpose and they don't have a good toilet, it basically discourages you to go as well, right? So this is the CAG report. It is very, very important and it is closely linked to Right to Education project. But almost 40% of those surveyed by the Comptroller and Auditor General were found to be non-existent, partially constructed or unused. So on paper they say we have made the toilets, but when CAG went and checked, not CAG, basically he is the head of Indian Audit and Account Services and they have many officials who conduct these studies. Anyways, there are 10.8 lakh government schools in our country. In an audit report presented in Parliament, the CAG said over 70% did not have running water facilities in the toilets. Now this is again a very stark reality that at many places they make toilets but there's no running water, so people don't use that. So Swachh Bharat Abhiyan had a component of running water as well. And its emulation at school level is called the Swachh Vidyalaya Abhiyan, right? While 75% were not being maintained hygienically. Now hygiene is also very, very important. Now the Swachh Vidyalaya Abhiyan, launched by the Human Resource Development Ministry in September 2014. Now it has been changed to Ministry of Education as per the new education policy that we've had. To meet the Right to Education Act's mandate that all schools must have separate toilets for boys and girls. See, it is such an important factor that even the Act itself mandates separate toilets for boys and girls. Now, what are the major challenges? Lack of dedicated funds, poor maintenance, and poor water availability in toilets were identified as major challenges. So even if you build them but you don't maintain them, or if there's no running water, it's practically useless, right? The central public sector enterprises were roped in to bridge the gap over a 1 year period. So basically what they did, they basically disposed of their CSR responsibilities through investing in this. Overall, more than 1.4 lakh toilets were built by 53 central public sector enterprises with significant support coming from power, coal and oil companies. These are all the revenue rich ones and they invested, but again, they did not do the work properly. So this is what CAG has highlighted. China vows to go carbon neutral by 2060. So interesting things to know in this is what is carbon neutrality, right? And then I will also be telling you about the concept of carbon sequestration because it is linked to carbon neutrality. Now basically China is saying, if you remember 3 or 4 videos back, we did an editorial which basically exposed the double standards of UN and all the so-called environmentalists when it comes to fighting the climate change and their vague concept of carbon neutrality, because this is something which is easy to say. Now, carbon neutrality does not mean that you stop or halt your emissions. It basically means that your net emissions should be 0. Now, how can that be? One of the methods is that you are emitting carbon, but at the same time, you are using some technology like carbon sequestration to capture the carbon. This is one way. Next way is you buy carbon credits. And this is how the European countries are going to do that. They will basically fund projects in countries that are developing countries, and from those countries they will buy some carbon credits. This whole regime is called carbon trading. It was introduced under the Kyoto Protocol, right? So they will buy the carbon credits which basically cancel their emissions. So that is how they are going to do it. It does not mean that they will be stopping their carbon emissions. One more thing, these European countries and the Americans, they just seem green to us, but their per capita emission, which is what really counts, is much higher than what we produce in India, right? So these are the points that we must know, and you, if you have time, just go back and watch that video because that editorial was really good. It has exposed the double standards. Now coming back to it. So China basically said it at the UNGA virtual address by Xi Jinping. Now Xi said that to basically upset America, because America under Trump has pulled out of the Paris Agreement. Now we all know Trump and the kind of intelligence he has. Some say either he's a very smart person or a very dumb person, and the kind of constituency he caters to. So he does not actually believe that climate change is a reality. He calls it hoax, right? So let's not get into it. So under him, America has pulled out of Paris deal, and China says that we'll be going carbon neutral by 2060. So let's see what the article is saying. First, let us see what it means to be carbon neutral. I've already given you an introduction. Please take a screenshot. As a matter of fact, please take all the screenshots so that you have ready-made notes. And if you further want these notes, you can just contact us on our email ID upscforeveryone@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram, and we'll be more than happy to share the PDFs with you. Okay. Now getting back to it, what it means to be carbon neutral. First, emissions. You reduce your emissions, and remaining emission what you do, carbon sequestration, you capture and you absorb, and you offset by buying carbon credits, which were introduced under Kyoto Protocol, and the net effect would be zero emissions or carbon neutrality. So please remember, carbon neutral does not mean that you stop your carbon emissions. It means you are using some ingenious methods or some vague calculations to arrive at this so-called figure of zero emission. The goals, which include a pledge to reach peak emissions in 2030, are the most concrete ones yet announced by China, which is the world's biggest polluter and accounts for a quarter of planet's greenhouse gas emissions. If you remember, I've also told you about the principle of CBDR, which is common but differentiated responsibilities. So all the developing countries, including India and China, this is one of the rare instances where India and China stand together. We say that, okay, we agree that there is climate change and we agree it is our responsibility, but because the developed world have been historical polluters, I've told you that their industrialization started in the 18th century and they have been polluting the environment unabatedly, and the whole environmentalism basically started in 1970s. Before that, there was nobody to stop them. So they just went on polluting, and now they are preaching to us. So what we say, okay, we agree that yes, we need to reduce our emissions, but we will go by the principle of CBDR. That means we will reduce our emissions to a lower level than what the developed countries have to do. And number two, the developed countries must pay us or transfer technology to us so that we can afford green energy, right? And I also told you in that article that these European countries, what they are saying, that we are shifting away from coal, and all these environmentalists and these activists, they also say that coal is bad. Why do they say that? Again, it is a propaganda, because these guys are shifting to oil and gas. These are also fossil fuels. They also give out emissions, right? But since they are rich, they can afford that. So they have demonized coal. And who depends on coal? Developing countries like India. Now we cannot shift to oil or gas overnight. We need a time for that transition. So this is the whole environmentalist industry. Okay. They also open a new divergence in relations with the US, which are already pinched by squabbles over trade, technology, defense, and human rights. I have told you that this is to upset US, which has pulled out of Paris deal. The 2060 objective is still a decade later. In an earlier video, I told you that these European countries, they basically plan to go carbon neutral by 2050. Then the date set by dozens of small states as well as European powers. Now what is carbon neutral? We saw that figure. Now that figure is in words here. Carbon neutrality means having a balance between emitting carbon and absorbing carbon from the atmosphere in carbon sinks. Again, carbon neutral does not mean zero carbon emission. It means the net should be zero. Removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then storing it is known as carbon sequestration. I'll just tell you what it is. In order to achieve net zero emissions, all worldwide greenhouse gas emissions will have to be counterbalanced by carbon sequestration. But this is a very, very costly technology. Developing countries like us, we cannot afford it right away. Now let us see what is carbon sequestration. carbon capture and sequestration. The first word being the capture. So basically, using different methods, they capture the carbon that is emitted. Then it is pumped into some abandoned old oil fields or between impenetrable or impregnable rocks that exist in the Earth's crust, and there this carbon gets trapped. So this is the whole technology. There are also proposals to trap it below the oceans. So let's see what this figure is saying. The distance between the power station and the CCS storage facility can extend to distances over 500 kilometers. So what will happen? The chimney of the power station would be connected to this pipe and all the carbon would come here. No exhaust, simply into this pipe. CO2 is injected and stored underground. These are impermeable rocks which keep CO2 underground. CO2 is pumped to a depth of about 1.5 kilometers or more. Like I said, depleted oil or gas reservoir is used for pumping. Natural saline aquifer, so they pump it into that, either abandoned field or saline aquifers. Now what happens? CO2 becomes stabilized within the porous rock as it forms natural compounds with the surrounding brine and minerals. So basically it gets absorbed and it changes its form and it gets stabilized within these rocks. So this is the whole concept of carbon capture and sequestration. This is also a very hot topic for your examination. So this is a basic demonstration of how it's supposed to work. Non-utilization of cesses and levies. Again, a report by CAG. So in this, we don't have to go into the figures. As a matter of fact, figures are rarely important for you in your examination as far as UPSC is concerned. So we'll just understand some concepts related with this, like the Consolidated Fund of India, what is a cess and what is a surcharge. So first, let us briefly look at what the CAG is saying. The CAG of India told Parliament that Centre has only transferred 60% of the proceeds from cesses levies in fiscal year 2018-19 to the relevant reserve funds and retained the balance in the Consolidated Fund of India. So what is Consolidated Fund of India? I will just be telling you. The centre had allocated 2.75 lakh crore from 35 cesses and levies in financial year 19. However, it has only transferred 1.64 lakh crore and retained 1.1 lakh crore in the Consolidated Fund of India. Now again, students, this is not a scam, because even a single penny from the Consolidated Fund of India cannot be spent by government without the concurrence of the Parliament. So every year government has to give an account to the Parliament, and only when the Parliament passes that account, then can the Government of India access that fund. So it is not a scam. Again, I'm telling you, it is not a scam. It is just telling us that government basically has used some inventive accounting to get some more revenue. That is all. The 40,000 crore of GST compensation cess, the 40,000 crore of GST compensation cess was not credited to the related reserve fund. Again, these are just some figures which are not important. Let's look at the concepts here. Now, first of all, how are they used? Cesses and levies collected are required to be first transferred to designated reserve funds and utilized for the specific purposes intended by Parliament. Now, basically, cess is a tax on tax, and it is levied for a very peculiar reason. For example, for education, for Swachh Bharat, for example, there was 0.5% cess for Swachh Bharat. So whatever tax you pay, over and above that, 0.5% more you will pay for Swachh Bharat. So that is cess, right? So whenever they are levied, their proceedings have to be transferred into the dedicated funds. But before it comes to CFI, because all the money that is the Government of India receives has to be accounted to the CFI. Basically, the Government of India accounts are maintained in two accounts, the CFI and the public accounts. So I will tell you what is CFI and public accounts. All the other money goes to public accounts. Now, the taxes and surcharges in CFI are parked in a divisible pool, and 42% of the total is given to states as devolution. And these recommendations are basically given by Finance Commission, which is again a constitutional body under Article 280. And a Finance Commission is formed every 5 years, and it gives the formula for distribution of revenue between center and the states. Now coming back to it, what is Consolidated Fund of India? Article 266 Clause 1. there is another account called Contingency Fund of India that is maintained for any exigency or emergency purposes, and the fund of that is also approved by the parliament, and the quantum is approved by the president, how much money is to be kept in it, and all the monies are transferred with the concurrence of parliament only. But it is at the disposal of president. Whenever he feels that there is some exigency or emergency, he can use that contingency fund. Now, Consolidated Fund of India under Article 266 Clause 1 of the Constitution of India, what all comes under it? All the revenues received by the center by way of taxes, income tax, whatever taxes, and non-tax revenues. All the loans raised by center by issue of public notifications, treasury bills, and from foreign governments and international institutions. So all taxes, all loans, all government expenditures are incurred from this fund except exceptional items which are met from the contingency fund and the public account. So I've told you about both. There is Consolidated Fund of India, Contingency Fund of India, and the public accounts. The public accounts are basically for the repetitive, mundane expenditure. The main account, the biggest account, is the Consolidated Fund of India. And no amount can be withdrawn from the fund without the authorization from the parliament. Like I told, that not even a single penny can Government of India spend without the concurrence of the parliament. So whatever I'm telling you here, whatever the CAG report is, it does not mean that there is any scam happening in the country. The CAG audits the fund and reports to the relevant legislatures on the management, right? And I told you that CAG sends its report to the president and the state governors, and they have to table it in their respective domains. President has to table it before both houses of the parliament and the governor in the respective state legislatures. Now, what is the cess? Cess is a form of tax levied over and above the base tax liability of a taxpayer. For example, your tax comes out to be 30% or 20% or 10%, then 0.5% extra for your cess purpose. Cess is resorted to only when there is a need to meet any particular expenditure for public welfare. Again, not even a single tax can be imposed without the concurrence of the parliament. Not the Government of India, but parliament. Any legal tax has to be imposed by the parliament under Article 267. So you remember that. So whenever a cess is levied, it is by the concurrence of parliament. It is not the domain or not the wish of the Government of India, but the parliament. Cess is not a permanent source of revenue for the government, and it is discontinued when the purpose of levying it is fulfilled. So let us say that 10 years down the line, we achieve total sanitation and there is no open defecation. Now, there cannot be absolute zero open defecation, because even in countries like America, people defecate in the open, right? Even in places like Las Vegas and New York, that happens. So they can not exactly be zero, but when figures are absolutely low, then we can say that we have achieved total sanitation. So if we happen to achieve that, then we'll be removing the Swachh Bharat cess that we have imposed. It can be levied on both indirect and direct taxes. I've also told you about the concept of direct tax and indirect tax. Direct tax basically are progressive taxes, and they basically depend on your ability to earn the revenue that you're generating. It is basically proportional to that. For example, if you're earning 1 crore rupees, then your tax liability would be higher. But if you're earning 10 lakh rupees in comparison to 1 crore rupees, your tax liability would be lower. Now, this is the indirect tax, which is uniform for all. For example, you buy a chocolate. So whatever the tax is there on the chocolate, it would be same for you, for Mr. Ambani, for Mr. Bill Gates. Everybody would be paying the same. So this is a regressive tax. So for any progressive tax regime, direct tax should be greater than indirect tax. What are the examples of direct tax? Your income tax and corporate tax. What are the examples of indirect tax? Your GST tax. Now coming to it, example of a cess. Swachh Bharat cess introduced in 2015, a 0.5% Swachh Bharat cess was imposed to fund a national campaign for clearing the roads, streets and infrastructure of India. So if that happens, then probably we'll be removing this. Now what is surcharge? Surcharge is an extra charge that is applied or imposed on you. A surcharge is an extra fee, charge or tax that is added onto the cost of a good or service beyond the initially quoted price. It is added to an existing tax and is not included in the stated price of the good or services. So it is not included in the MRP. It is over and above the MRP that you have to pay a surcharge. It is levied for extra service or to defray the cost of increased commodity pricing. For example, the movie theaters, they would put an illegal surcharge on you. There's a mineral water bottle which costs about rupees 20, but they would ask you 100 rupees. Why this 80 rupees extra? They would say, sir, we are giving you the service of air conditioned movie theater, and that is why we are collecting a surcharge of rupees 80. So this is basically what the movie theaters do. That is basically thuggery, but government of India is allowed to do that. So these are the relevant portions that we needed from this article. The concept of Consolidated Fund of India, Contingency Fund of India, public accounts, right? Cess, surcharge, and direct and indirect tax. These are the concepts that we discussed in this article. G4 Foreign Ministers meeting. So basically in yesterday's video, we covered G4 and UNSC reforms. We did that in detail. We also saw the principles in the IGN document that G4 gave the 5 principles of reform. So this article is a supplement to what we discussed yesterday. As I told you yesterday, G4 is a group of 4 countries, including India, Brazil, Japan, and Germany. They are basically seeking the expansion of the UNSC and the reforms within UNSC. So they have a reform agenda. And I also told you that who are basically opposing the reforms. Number 1, the UNSC itself, especially US, Russia, and China, because they don't want to lose their veto power. And we also discussed the whole politics of veto yesterday, right? And there is another group which has Pakistan as its member, and it is called a Coffee Club. So the Coffee Club is a group of 40 countries which are basically opposing any expansion or reforms in UNSC. So Pakistan opposes India for obvious reasons. Then there are other countries as well. So we'll see that. Then we'll also see some other points which are a supplement to whatever we discussed yesterday. So please go back and watch yesterday's video as well. So recently, foreign ministers from the group of 4 consisting of India, Brazil, Japan, and Germany participated in a virtual meeting. So basically they said they would reach out to similar minded countries to raise this issue and agenda of reform. I told you yesterday as well that this is 75th year of UN. So we'll be getting many articles about UN, plus UN is important for this year and the next year examination. Now G4 is a group of countries that are seeking permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council, UNSCs. The ministers of G4 reaffirmed their common resolve to finally take decisive steps towards the early and comprehensive reform of the Security Council that was envisaged by heads of state and government in 2005 World Summit. Because from 2005, they started the IGN process, right? And in 2015, the IGN gave a document, but then nothing much has been done on that document. Now G4 on UNSC reforms, ensuring greater representation of Africa, because Africa, there is no representative of Africa, there is no representative of South America, and there is no representative from Oceania or the Australian continent, which consists of Australia and New Zealand and many other island nations. So basically there should be representation from all of them. So ensuring greater representation for Africa to begin with. Africa needs to be represented in both the permanent and non-permanent categories of UNSC to correct the historical injustice against the continent with regard to its underrepresentation in the Security Council. And I told you yesterday that UNSC basically came in the backdrop of Second World War, and the P5 over the permanent 5, the first 4 were US, Russia, France, and Britain. They were basically considered the victors of World War II, and the 5th one, China, was later on added, right? So no representation to Africa, such a big continent. So number 1 is more representation for Africa. Then enhanced role for developing countries and of major contributors to UN. Yesterday I also told you that there is a power asymmetry between the UNSC and the UNGA. Now UNGA is a General Assembly of which all the members of the United Nations are part, but UNSC is a small body consisting of only 15 members, 5 permanent and 10 temporary. And out of those 15, the 5 are the ones that really wield a power. So there should be enhanced role for developing countries and of major contributors to the UN. India is also one of the major contributors in terms of resources, manpower, especially for the peacekeeping forces. To make UNSC more legitimate, effective, and representative, it is needed to increase the number of permanent from 5 to 11 and non-permanent from 10 to 14. So basically, then UNSC would be a 25-member body. Then the next agenda, the permanent seats shall be elected in the following manner: 2 from African states, 2 from Asian states, 1 from Latin American and Caribbean states, 1 from Western European and other states. So now you see these Western European, would they actually agree to it, considering the fact that 2 Western European members are part of UNSC permanent members, UK and France? Would they be willing for such a change? Not at all. Non-permanent members shall be elected according to the following pattern: 1 from African states, 1 from Asian states, 1 from Eastern European states, 1 from Latin American and Caribbean states. Now who is opposing? I told you the P5, because they don't want to lose their veto. The UNSC reforms proposed earlier had been opposed by the 5 permanent members P5, as they demand veto power for the new members as well, and this is known as Rizali Plan. However, later, the new countries decided to forego the veto power for new countries, which was accepted by P5 countries, Rizali Reform Plan. So Rizali Plan said that the developing countries or the new countries, they want permanent seat in the UNSC and they also want veto powers. Again, these 5 were not happy with it. So there was a Rizali Reform Plan which said, okay, we will expand UNSC. We will take more members as UNSC permanent members, but we won't give them veto power. So you see the joke that they're actually pulling off. Anyways, Coffee Club. It is an informal coffee club or uniting for consensus group has opposed the UNSC reforms. Most members of the club are middle-sized states who oppose bigger regional powers grabbing permanent seats in the UN Security Council. While Italy and Spain are opposed to Germany's bid for UNSC's permanent membership, Pakistan is opposed to India's bid. Similarly, Argentina is against Brazil's bid and Australia opposes Japan's. So again, geopolitics at play. I've already told you the Rizali Plan and the Rizali Reform Plan. Rizali Plan asked for the veto power for the expanded members who would be added to the UNSC permanent membership. But the Rizali Reform said that we would expand the permanent members, but we won't give them veto power. Now what is Isul-Vini Consensus? A position on international relations and reform of the United Nations agreed by the African Union. It calls for a more representative and democratic Security Council in which Africa, like all other world regions, is represented. So, Isul-Vini Consensus is related to Africa, basically a contract or an agreement between UN and African Union, and it says that the UNSC should be more democratic and representation to African countries. Then the Sirte Declaration, it was the resolution adopted to establish the African Union. So from the Sirte Declaration came the African Union. Basically, 54 countries are part of the African Union, and India regularly holds summit with African Union countries. What are text-based negotiations? Yesterday I told you the G4 will work with other reform-minded countries and groups to start text-based negotiations, because talks won't yield a result. It has to be written in iron form. Then only we can actually expect real reforms. India is a proponent of TBN at the UN. Countries opposed to UNSC reform, including China, are hesitant to have a TBN for intergovernmental negotiations on the grounds that the matter is too sensitive for text, because once it gets down on paper and signed, then it is sealed, and China does not want that. So this is all about this. So the important points were Isul-Vani Consensus, the Sirte Declaration, the Coffee Club that I told you about, right? And also the Rizali Plan and the Rizali Reform Plan. So this is all about it. Please go back and watch yesterday's video for more clarity on this issue. Fungi tablets to tackle crop stubble burning by farmers. So in yesterday's video, we discussed this issue of stubble burning in detail. So I'm not going to get into it again. If you want, you can go back to it and you can refer to it. I've explained everything there, why it happens, what are the unique climatic conditions, what are the policy failures, what are its impacts, everything has been explained. So I would not be getting into that. Please go back and watch that video if you're, if you're really interested. Now coming back to it, Let's see what the article is saying. Scientists at the Indian Agricultural Research Institute IARI have come up with a way called Pusa decomposer to tackle crop residue burning by farmers. As I told you in yesterday's video, what really happens that the farmers, they basically harvest their rice crop, right, which is a kharif crop. Then the residue is left. I also told you that apart from basmati variety, the non-basmati variety, its residue is not useful as a fodder because it is high in silica. So it is a waste for farmers. Now it takes time to decompose it naturally. What they do, they basically mix it with sand and water and leave it. But that process takes 45 days. And this is a very crucial time for farmers because they have to clear the land and then prepare it for the next season for sowing of wheat, which is a rabi crop, major crop. So they prefer to burn the residue. One of the reasons was also that they have gone for increasing mechanization, and mechanization increases the waste production. So that was also one of the reasons. So basically the farmers, just to speed up the things, they burn it. It takes 45 days. Now the researchers at IARA have come up with a Pusa decomposer, which is nothing but a 4-tablet package, and it decomposes this rice straw in 25 days. So that basically saves 20 days, which is more than enough for preparing the land. So this is a very, very good thing. Now let us see what the article is saying about it. What is stubble burning? As we discussed yesterday, it is a traditional practice in Punjab and Haryana to clean off the rice chaff to prepare the fields for winter sowing. It begins around October and peaks in November, coinciding with withdrawal of southwest monsoon. And in yesterday's video, I also told you that the problem gets more accentuated in the winters because of temperature inversion over Delhi NCR region. The conditions become stable so that pollutants are not blown away and they get stabilized. And had the southwest monsoon be blowing, it would have taken away that pollutants from the Delhi sky. But since they are not blowing, then again they get accumulated over Delhi. Now Pusa decomposer. It is a set of 4 tablets made by extracting fungi strains that help paddy straw to decompose at a much faster rate than usual, giving farmers the option to shred the straw, spray a solution containing the fungal strain and mix it with soil for decomposition. Now, like I said, they don't have enough time. Under usual circumstances, shredded watered paddy straw, which is mixed with soil, takes at least 45 days to decompose, not giving enough time to farmers to prepare fields for the wheat crop on time. But with the help of Pusa decomposer, it only takes 25 days. But the Pusa decomposer will decompose it in 25 days. The method will be cheap and also result in better soil quality. How? I told you yesterday, when you burn, what really happens, the soil moisture also gets depleted and the helpful microorganisms and organisms within the soil, they also die. So the harmful effects of stubble burning, we discussed it yesterday as well. It emits large amount of toxic pollutants, methane, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds and carcinogenic polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. The burning of wheat straw reduces soil fertility besides polluting the environment. Additionally, the heat generated by stubble burning penetrates into the soil, leading to loss of moisture and useful microbes. So burning leads to loss of moisture and useful microbes. But if this Pusa decomposer is used, it will be decomposed within the soil, and what will happen? Soil will get humus, which is the organic content, and it will also promote the growth of microbes which are helpful for soil. So this is a much superior method, and this should be adopted on a large scale. Mass stranding of whales. So unfortunately, it happens that whales, they get stranded at shallow beaches and they die in large hordes. So the latest incident is happening at the Tasmanian coast, which is around Australia, right? So let's see what is it all about. Over 450 long-finned pilot whales have died in Australia's largest recorded mass stranding event. The whales were beached at the remote beach in Tasmania's west coast. Now basically, some scientists say that the whales have very strong bonds. They are emotionally very, very integrated. So even if one of them gets distracted, or even if one gets stuck somewhere, all the other whales of the pod, the group of whales is known as pod. So they follow that misguided or the lost whale, and they all get stranded and they die together. Very sad thing. What are the beaching stranding events? Beaching refers to the phenomena of dolphins and whales stranding themselves on beaches. There are around 2000 strandings each year worldwide, with most resulting in death of the animal. Whales strand themselves on beaches either singularly or in groups. While individual strandings are mostly attributed to injury or sickness, it is not clear why exactly whales beach themselves in groups. Possible reasons behind mass strandings. Some whales follow schooling fish or other prey into shallow waters, which causes the whales to become disoriented, as a result of which they get stranded. Another reason could be the panic from being trapped by a predator such as killer whales or sharks. Another possibility is that whales might be drawn to land by prey-rich currents. Some scientists believe that sonar signals and other man-made loud underwater noises may contribute to beaching events. So these are all speculations, these are all probable causes that may lead to stranding, but nobody knows for sure what really happens. Further, the shape of the beach and coastline could also have a role to play. Now, what are the long-finned pilot whales? These are one of the two species of pilot whale along with the short-finned pilot whales. These prefer deep temperate to subpolar oceanic waters, but they have been known to occur in coastal waters in some areas. See, such a majestic creature, and it's really sad that they are dying in such large numbers. They have been documented near the Antarctic Sea and associated with the colder Benguela and Humboldt currents. So basically they follow the currents, and these currents are rich in nutrients. That is why they follow these currents, which may extend their normal range. So sometimes following these currents, they exceed their range and they go to far off places and they get stuck there. And the climate change would also be having an impact on these currents and these whale strandings. Now, since this is happening in Australia, so a brief about Australia's geography as well. This is Tasmania. Okay. The strait between Australia and Tasmania is known as Bass Strait. Now see, this is simple. Australia's mapping is simple. That is why I am telling you. So what is a strait? Strait is a narrow water body which connects two larger bodies. So here it is connecting basically the Antarctic Ocean and the Tasman Sea. And what is it? The Bass Strait, and this is Tasmania. Okay. So the strandings are happening somewhere here. Now this is Western Australia. This is Tropic of Capricorn, that is basically passing through Australia, almost the middle of it. The similarity with India is that through India, Tropic of Cancer passes. This is 26.5 degree south degree, and that is 26.5 degree north. So this is a similarity with India. Then important places, like I said, this is Western Australia, Gibson Desert, Great Victorian Desert, then Nullarbor Plain, Great Sandy Desert, and this Kimberley Plateau. This Kimberley Plateau is again, like I told you in yesterday's video when we were discussing about Tibet, then plateaus are very, very rich in natural resources. So is the case with Kimberley Plateau. Then these are the mountain ranges, Great Dividing Range, Great Dividing Range. This is the world famous Great Barrier Reef. Then Gulf of Carpentaria, Timor Sea, and Great Australian Bight. So I'm just giving you an introduction in this. Sometimes later when we'll be discussing mapping in detail, I will try to make one video soon. Then we will discuss the importance of all these places. So you can take a screenshot. This is just to give you an idea where Tasmania is, where is Australia, the major cities, right? So folks, this is all about this video. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. Also, if you like the video, please press the like button, and please do connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. See you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.